Dogfights filled the skies. Streams of fire scorched the earth. Gunfire sounded faster than rain on a tin roof. A war like this had never been seen before. When most of us learned about World War I in school, our lessons typically focused on the causes of the war, the logistics of battles, and, of course, the aftermath. But did you know that World War I came with new and drastic changes for soldiers? Welcome to Historian's Corner, where today we are going to share 5 major changes in warfare soldiers saw in World War I. Until the 1900s, semi-automatic and single-shot weapons were the most advanced weapons that had been used in a major conflict. This changed with the widespread use of the machine gun during World War I. The first machine guns were patented in the US by Hiram Maxim in 1884. The machine could fire 450 to 600 rounds of ammunition per minute and only weighed about 100 pounds. Most machine guns used in World War I were based on this design. At the beginning of the war, machine guns were fired via a hand crank, but by 1918 they were fully automatic. The rate at which the weapon could fire drastically changed the tactics that were employed by both sides during the war. Certain soldiers became specialists in machine gunnery and introduced the tactic of barrage fire, where they were able to shoot over their own troops' heads. This was a significant change in the way in which battles had previously been fought. One thing that troops did to try to combat the use of machine guns and barrage fire was to protect themselves in trenches. Trench warfare can be traced back to the American Civil War, but the practice really took hold during World War I. Miles and miles of these long, deep trenches were dug along the Western Front. Prior to this war, trenches were used primarily as a topographical defense against attacks. But with the use of modern weapons, such as machine guns and artillery, trenches became a fundamental tactical strategy. Infantry soldiers would occupy trenches for weeks at a time, which came with its own harrowing set of circumstances. Ptsd, also known as shell shock at the time, from being stuck in trenches under constant fire was a common occurrence. Disease ran rampant among the soldiers because of the unsanitary conditions and close quarters. Cholera, dysentery, and typhoid fever were some of the most common infectious diseases that rapidly spread among the ranks. Trench foot, a condition where dead tissue spread across one or both feet occurring due to the continuously wet conditions, as well as trench mouth, an infection of the gums, which was thought to have been caused by the stress of constantly being under fire, were both prevalent as well. So far, we've seen a sort of a domino effect. Widespread use of the machine gun led to the heavy use of trench warfare. We will see the next domino fall with our next development, the introduction of the flamethrower. World War I saw the use of flamethrowers starting in 1915. The Germans used a flamethrower designed by Hungarian Gábor Zakatz on February 26 against the French outside of Verdun. However, it wasn't until July 30th, 1915 that it was first used in concerted action against the British in Belgium. The fire from the flamethrowers was used to flush soldiers out of the trenches before the enemy would gun them down. The British suffered 782 casualties in 2 days from this attack. This overwhelming success led Germany to integrate flamethrowers on all fronts and create squads of 6 to specifically use the device in more than 650 attacks. While the Germans became sufficient in the use of the flamethrowers, it wasn't without its shortcomings. The flamethrower was only useful at short distances, extremely difficult to carry, and could only safely be used from trenches. While it was mostly used by the Germans, the British, French, Italians, and Russians also used different models of flamethrowers throughout the rest of the war. The use of flamethrowers made troops feel even less safe in the trenches they occupied, adding to the fear they were already experiencing due to artillery and machine gun fire. During World War I, the world also saw the use of chemical warfare for the first time. In 1899, the world's military powers were concerned that the outcome of future wars would be decided through chemistry instead of artillery, and banned the use of poison-laden projectiles as part of the Hague Convention. Technically, no one during World War I violated the ban because they didn't use projectiles filled with poison gas. However, the use of gas distributed by other methods was prevalent on both sides. France was the first country to implement this type of warfare, utilizing tear gas grenades against the Germans in August of 1914. In January of 1915, the Germans used tear gas against the Russian armies, but it was so cold outside that the gas turned to liquid upon contact with the air. In April of that year, the Germans decided tear gas just wasn't cutting it. and started to use poisonous chlorine gas to inflict horrific damage. Over the remaining course of the war, the German armies released 68,000 tons of poisonous gas. The British and the French released 51,000 tons. Soldiers fighting on both sides suffered, choking on the horrific clouds of toxic chemicals. If soldiers weren't already facing enough of the never-before-seen horrors in modern war, air power was another development of World War I. At the start of the war, airplanes were mostly used for reconnaissance missions. During these missions, pilots started shooting at enemy airmen with small firearms when passing each other as both sides tried to gather information. After this, aircrafts began to be armed with machine guns starting in 1915, and they began engaging in aerial combat known as dogfighting. Pilots, affectionately known as air aces, developed celebrity status during and after the war. Air aces was a term for pilots credited with shooting down 5 or more enemy aircrafts, with some, such as Manfred von Richthofen, also known as the Red Baron, scoring 80 official victories. Military aviation was highly romanticized during World War I, as pilots normally flew alone and were frequently faced with opportunities for personal bravery. The majority of these pilots died in the war, either due to combat or crashes from aircraft malfunctions. This also contributed to their status of heroic martyrs in the public eye. Thankfully for the soldiers involved, there was one positive development during World War I. Many medical advances were fast-tracked during this time. Doctors and nurses quickly learned better ways of caring for wounds and setting broken bones, which greatly reduced the number of soldier deaths. Before this, 80% of soldiers that broke a bone in the field were likely to die, but after the creation and usage of the Thomas splint, the soldiers were able to survive those injuries. Skin graft surgery to help injured soldiers, especially those affected from chemical gas and flamethrower attacks, was pioneered during the time by English doctor Harold Gillies. New techniques for facial reconstructions and treating burn victims were created, as well as breakthroughs in prosthetic limb technology to meet the immense needs of amputees. The sheer number of soldiers coming home from the war needing care led healthcare professionals to discover the efficiency of medical specializations and professional management. Around 2 million soldiers came home from the war disfigured and disabled, which led to advances in rehabilitation and post-war care, and ultimately reshaped the healthcare system as a whole. With the drastic changes that were implemented in combat during World War I, the scene of a battlefield completely evolved. New weapons and tactics shaped the way modern-day wars are fought, and the life of a soldier was forever changed. What change do you think made the biggest impact? Let us know in the comments. For more historical content, subscribe to our channel and check out some more of our videos. Until next time, thanks for watching Historian's Corner.